Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Cardinal Reinhard Marx of Berlin has recently instructed his priests in his archdiocese to introduce a handout called Blessing Gives Strength to Love. It's the basis of pastoral care for a particular subset within the archdiocese. Pope Leo was asked about the measure on his return from his trip from Africa. We look at the situation with Carl Olson. Carl is a dear friend, editor of Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight, and author of way too many books to honestly list them all. But one of his great books is Did Jesus Really Rise from the Dead? The other one is Will Catholics Be Left Behind? He's also editor, contributor, and co-editor of Called to be Children of God and a host of others. Carl, great to speak with you, my friend. How are you?
Good, Marcus. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I didn't want to continue because then all we do for the next two segments is list your achievements, and we really got to get to.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Okay, for the benefit of all of our listeners, what's going on with Blessings Give Strength to Love? What was the quote unquote pastoral care basis that was being put forth?
Well, it's put forth by Cardinal Marx. Of course, is one of the leading cardinals in Germany. He was part of the, kind of the inner circle of Pope Francis for quite a while, and he's been one of the main leaders of the synodal way in Germany, which has for years now been intent on pushing through more and more openly defiant procedures and protocols regarding things like same-sex blessings and related matters having to do with the LGBTQ XYZ movement. And this document came out on April 4th, and it basically gives directives to priests and other people how to administer these open blessings of same-sex relationships, cohabitating relationships, people who've been civilly divorced and remarried, a host of different irregular situations, and doing it in a way that goes beyond what Pope Francis outlined in his directives of a couple of years ago, which of course those were quite brought up quite the furor. People were understandably not happy with those directives, which came down from Cardinal Fernandez and the dicastery on the Doctrine of Faith. But this goes, I think, further in that it just blatantly says, "Hey, we're gonna openly bless these people." And their relationship. And it talks, what's interesting to me is how the document refers to love many times over, and it's clearly what I refer to in my editorial as a bourgeois form of love. It's whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel happy. And then, hey, God is lucky enough to come along and be part of our journey of love, even though the kind of love that's being described clearly goes contrary to the Church's, moral teaching. So my point in the piece that I've written about this is that one of the things that has to be done is there has to be a real clarity about what do we mean by love, because what's being described in this document by Cardinal Marx and other documents from the German Church clearly does not reflect the kind of true, authentic Christian love that we find in the New Testament, that we find demonstrated and taught by Christ, by the apostles, etc. So and then this, a question was put to Pope Leo about this as he was returning from Africa, and that's what kind of broke this thing open wider. Even though this document's been out there, Pope Leo was asked about it on his way back to Rome the other day. So that's kind of what caused this to become a kind of a big issue.
So tell us about Pope Leo's comments in specificity. What was he trying to address?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, because the important thing is that he has asked a really interesting, I thought a very good question about having been in Africa for 10 or 11 days for his apostolic visit there, where, of course, Catholics in Africa tend to be far more, Catholic in their view of marriage and sexuality and so forth. I would say traditional, but it's just Catholic, their approach to it. And, of course, what's being advocated by the German Church is not. And so the question was, how does Pope Leo plan to try to keep the Church unified when you have these obviously differing, in fact, completely contrasting and competing perspectives? How is that unity? Of course, he as a Pope is a figure of authentic unity in the Church. How is he going to do that? And Leo's answer is an interesting one. He made a point of saying that, well, too often people, when they focus on the moral teachings of the church, they kind of boil it down to just things about sexuality. I think that's absolutely a true observation. But then he makes the point that that's not the key priority. The priority for him are things like equality, justice, and religious freedom. And so I think that maybe it wasn't his best answer in my view. I think he could have maybe addressed things a little bit more directly, but he did say very clearly that the Vatican has been in conversation with the German bishops and has told them that in my words, they're not happy with this document from Cardinal Marx and the direction it's been going. And Pope Francis, to be fair, Pope Francis was not either. He was very critical at times of the way the German church handled things. But I think some people took what Pope Leo said and ran with it. It made it sound like he was saying, well, the church's sexual teachings about sexuality and morality are not important. That's not what he was saying. He was saying that the unity of the church is not found first and foremost in what she says about marriage or sexuality, but in other things. But I think it could have been worded, in my opinion, a little bit differently. But, that's the nature of these kind of literally on the fly interviews given on occasion by the Pope.
There have been people speculating who take to social media immediately, trying to imply that Leo is therefore declaring an absolute reversal of Francis's attempts in Fiducia Supplicans. Can you speak some reason into that?
Well, he indicated very clearly in his remark that that these kind of quote unquote blessings should not go beyond what Francis indicated in the document of 2 years ago, and according to Leo, that was essentially that if there are same-sex couples, that they would be part of like a church, a parish congregation, that they would not be pulled aside and given a special blessing to their particular quote unquote relationship. Now, I think people can try to parse all that out. The difficulty, I think, is not in what Leo says. The difficulty is in the original document from the DDF and from the Francis Pontificate, which, again, that document, I think, was a real mess, a real problem, and presented all kinds of challenges because it just was at times ambiguous, at times conflicting, and so forth. So I think Leo has been left with kind of a mess. He's trying to make the best of it, and I suspect there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we will know about for some time. But I think at some point, obviously, it's going to have to be addressed when it comes to these German cardinals and so forth and bishops. It's going to have to be handled directly. Otherwise, there's just going to be a continued disunity, and we can talk about unity all we want, but if there's actual obvious disunity and groups of Catholics doing things that are completely contrary to the Church's teaching, then that's in my mind, kind of a false unity. It's not authentic.
And even that question of authenticity when it comes to this pastoral care, the lines of that has been greatly blurred by the German Church, and like you've rightly noted, even Francis during his papacy expressed anywhere from a genuine disappointment to at least great concern for their direction.
Yeah, and then of course it's not just as you well know, it's not just the German Church, although it's kind of a leading example of this. You have other areas like Belgium and other parts of Northern Europe, and then of course here in America we have people like Father Jim Martin, quite famously, is openly advocating. I mean, he's the one who ended up having a photo in the New York Times, I believe it was, blessing two men and their relationship just a day or so after the document. That's very problematic. That kind of thing, it's going to have to end at some point and have to be addressed directly.
I'm talking with Carl Olson, who is the editor-in-chief of Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight, and we're talking right now about Pope Leo responding to Germans on same-sex blessings. It's a newly breaking issue, and we need to ground ourselves rightly. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. We're talking with Carl Olson, Editor-in-Chief of Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight. We're talking about Pope Leo XIV's recent statements in response to the German bishops pushing forward for formalized blessings of homosexual quote-unquote couples. Carl, I think before we go any further, one of the categories that we need to just bring some clarity to is the Church does not recognize any form of a relationship, if you will, between two homosexual individuals, a romantic relationship, as a coupling or as a couple, and that category needs to be just sort of clarified out so that we can therefore say formalizing a blessing for that is blessing something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and the German document that we've been discussing, the one that Cardinal Marx put on April 4th, muddies these waters even further because on one hand it says, well, this blessing can't take place within basically the liturgical celebration of the church, but we can have it in a place where there's going to be hymns, and there's going to be prayers, there's going to be people present, and the couple, the language is really interesting. It keeps talking about love, being this thing that where the people, the couple recognize it within each other, and it's basically what it's saying is that because they see it as love, then we must see it as love as well. But that's, of course, not what the Church teaches. There is a specific understanding of where certain types of love exist. Eros, of course, is within a married relationship between a man and woman, etc. And so the German document clearly tries to confuse it, blur the lines, which I think is all part of a very deliberate plan. And it's just an advancement of what they really have been pushing for a while now. And, of course, part of that includes things like the ordination of women and supporting the transgender nonsense and stuff like that. So it's really this is part of a larger issue, and it really comes down to, of course, anthropology and how we understand the human person, how the human person should be understood in terms of their relationship with others, and really the issue of chastity, which all of us, of course, are called to a life of chastity, because that's really just the right ordering of our persons when it comes to the whole person, and, of course, including our sexuality, who we are as men and women. And so these things are all tied together. That's why it's so important. It's not like this is just about doing what's right or doing what's wrong. It's about how do we live as men and women in the world, in relationship in our families, in our communities, within the church, etc. And the goal, of course, being to enter into eternal communion with God, right? That's the goal here. But the German document and others make it all about, hey, what makes you feel good? What makes you feel satisfied? Essentially, follow your passion is really kind of what I think, if you had to sum it up, that would be it. Follow your passions and do what makes you feel good. And, of course, that is not a Catholic approach to life.
And thank God for that.
Exactly.
Can you please speak to... Okay, so therefore, just based on what you've just shared, very saliently, I might add, the German bishops are pushing for an entirely different ethos when it comes to Christian moral living. They want to deviate from the 2,000 years of morality being a rational enterprise, that Christ has revealed this, and it's rational, we can think it through and live accordingly. Can you please speak to what they're doing and why that's dangerous?
Well, the German church, and of course it's not just the German church, but they're the greatest example of one that has a lot of money. There's been a lot of stories about the crazy amounts of money that the church gets there because of the church tax. It has a monstrous bureaucracy. And I've been told from people who live in Germany, good Catholics who know the system in Germany, they say that the vast majority of those who work within the church bureaucracy are completely sold out to a bourgeois secular form of quote-unquote faith. There's a veneer of faith. We want to talk about God and maybe even mention Jesus and the Holy Spirit from time to time, and we're going to have some services. But really, at the end of the day, it's just upper middle class German bourgeois secular society. There's complete capitulation. Of course, this is a constant temptation in the modern world. I mean, it's not like it's only a German thing. We see it in the United States. We see it throughout the West. But they have, taken it to kind of another level, not up but down, I would say. And it's a warning, really. It's a warning to us as to, hey, we're going to have to deal with this. We are dealing with it now. This kind of we as Christians are called to really a radical form of life, and we live in it now in a time of neo-paganism where the lines are becoming more and more clear, and yet there's so many within the church who say they're Catholic who don't want to live that. They want to be comfortable. They want to just kind of capitulate to, again, what I call bourgeois Christianity, and I'm borrowing that, by the way, from the great theologian Tracy Rowland, who uses it in some of her recent books and articles and describes it as having this veneer of Christianity, but really not living it, not pursuing it, not being a disciple of Christ, and not wanting to be holy, wanting to be comfortable rather than a disciple.
The other part of the issue, too, is that the Catholic Church is the final bastion for the concrete clarity of anthropology, human sexuality. If that bastion falls, what is to become of, say, family, society, even justice in the public sphere?
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, obviously there are a lot of very good and holy Christians who are Protestant or Eastern Orthodox who are living great lives and doing great things. But in terms of an institution, I think we're absolutely right. The Catholic Church is the last one, and it doesn't have the fragmentation. This is why this issue of unity, I think, is so important in so many different ways. Obviously, Christ desires unity. We look at the Gospel of John and his great prayer before he goes to his passion about unity. But that unity has to be rooted in the reality of what Christ lived and taught and what the church teaches. And if the church capitulates on this, and of course this goes back really centuries. I mean, think of what people like G.K. Chesterton and others like Belloc, Newman in his day talks about this. That essentially that if the Catholic Church goes away, there's nothing left there to stand in the way of what I would call neo-paganism, which really, as Chesterton warned, is far worse than the original paganism. It has almost a demonic quality. I think we see that in kind of the transgender insanity, which really is horrific in many cases what it does to young people. So, yeah, the church is kind of the lone voice. Obviously, we have many allies who aren't Catholic, but in terms of institution-wise, the Catholic Church is it.
There's been as part of this grander conversation, there's been a weaponization of Pope Francis's words, todos, 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 everyone, everyone,
Yep.
everyone. And so even the Germans would argue, well, they're doing this whole thing to welcome everyone. And so we've got here misplaced compassion guised as Christian love. Can you please speak to that?
Well, Leo, in his response to this question on the plane, refers to that statement by Francis, and he says that it's an expression of the Church's belief that all are welcome, all are invited to follow Jesus, and then he says all are invited to look for conversion in their lives. That is something, frankly, you didn't see a lot at times within the Francis pontificate, an emphasis on the need for conversion, of turning away from sin, of radical discipleship. And I think Leo has tried to bring that out more while trying to, he's showing his continuity with Francis, but I think he's trying to emphasize some of these other aspects a little bit more. And but the idea that everybody's just invited, but there's no criteria, which you're kind of speaking to, a more broad thing, the way those words have often been used, is a problem because it's only half the story, right? It's like you're invited, but then what? I mean, there is, in the Christian tradition and the Catholic Church, there is a clear path by which one becomes a disciple, and repentance and conversion are very hard of that. It's very significant and very important. Without that, you're not, without conversion, you don't become a disciple of Christ. It's that simple. And that conversion, for every single one of us, goes to the heart of what we are attached to that keep us from holiness, from virtue, etc. All of us have our own struggles. The rich man ruler had his wealth, but for others, it's pleasure or it's power or it's whatever it is. And so, to be invited is great. It's wonderful that people come in, but there is criteria to be a disciple of Christ, and I think that oftentimes is what people want to avoid. They'd rather not actually go through the hard work. They just want to have the status and not the labor, right?
And that's been one of the great horrors of many endeavors relating to the Catholic Church in modernity, that we welcome people in solely on the basis that we want them to be sons and daughters of God. Every other identification is either secondary, tertiary, or completely moot.
Yeah, I think at times that is very true, and I think what you have is we use the term bourgeois. It's not just for a rhetorical effect. It's the term bourgeois really speaks, again, I use the word comfortable, and I think it hits home at me because when I, as editor of Catholic World Report, I read accounts of what people in Nigeria, Christians in Nigeria, are going through, being murdered, being harmed, experiencing bombs blowing up their churches, and I think of how comfortable I have it. Then it's a real challenge. We have to challenge ourselves to convert at all times, to be continually renewed in our life in Christ.
Carl, as usual, tremendous honor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Marcus.
My guest has been Carl Olson, editor-in-chief of the Catholic World Report and Ignatius Insight, author of many books, and we've been talking about Pope Leo XIV's response to the German bishops. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.